Hi there, welcome to another video from the Vickers MG Collection and Research Association. This is one of our monthly question and answer sessions where we take the questions that we've been asked on social media or by email, just compile them into a little visual video, much better than trying to do a response online by email or just a written response. A picture's worth 1,000 words, but only where the picture actually replaces those words. So it's really important to try and get some of this information across. Some of these questions have come from our patrons, which is really appreciated, and those are certainly welcomed at the moment. We'd really like more and more of you to become patrons on Patreon, www.patreon.com/VickersMG, or just subscribe to us on the YouTube channel here. Ask the questions in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking of these videos as well. So in this first video, you'll see that we're once again sat in our machine gun dugout that we've got in the collection display space. It's a great sort of mechanism for bringing across some of the Great War information and sort of bringing a bit more alive. We haven't had the opportunity to show this to visitors yet, but we hope it'll be well received when it does. We're going to look though at a very common accessory. So one of the questions we've asked is what actually goes in this oil can case, and why, sort of supplementary question is why are they marked for the tripod? So on the top of this one, this is a 1915 example, January 1915, cans 303 tripod mountings, and you can just see all those markings up on the top here. A later example that we've got is an Australian made example and just says cans 303 mg, and what's this? This is 1943 dated. Now they both do the same thing, they carry oil cans for the Vickers, but what actually was carried in them? We've got another example here, not that one, sorry. So this one is cans 303 tripod mountings 1915 again. Very popular date because we've got another example of a January 1915. Now, from the 1942 Vocabulary of Army Ordnance stores, these still exist in there. And one of the loads for them includes these oil cans. And this is sort of what they call an engineer's type oil can. It's obviously a squirty can. They're cans half pint number 9 or cans oil lubricating half pint. And what you end up carrying in, trying to find the right thing, in these are two of these cans in the top there like that, or in the bottom, probably fits better in the top. But not only that, so you've got 1, 2, we've got a bit of flannelette bunged in there as well because we actually use this one. But then you've got cans oil half pint, which are these half pint oil cans, and they've got the large nozzle there, no brush on that. But then you've got this oiler here that allows you to drip or pour oil in a controlled manner onto the gun itself. So you can just see those there. So we've got two of those in there, these cans oil half pint. In the base. Now those actually go, again in the example that we've got here, they fit under the flaps in the bottom of the case. We do have one just to prove it, under there as well. So we've got the two of those. Let's say they fit in the flaps underneath. One of these flaps isn't fixed, so that you can lift that down and you can put it in there a lot easier like that. And then you have, as I said, the two cans oil lubricating or cans oil number 9 in on top, and that's what fits in, and that will all do up quite happily. We won't, because the leather on these is somewhat old, and we try and reduce the amount of time that we do them up or not. But you'll see that these loops on the end, very rarely do you see these with the straps, but we do have one with the strap that enables you to carry it almost in a very awkward manner. But it gives us a clue as to why these are cans tripod mountings. So the origins of these is part of I think it's the Mark III carriage mount for the Maxim. This is one of those accessories that lives beyond the Maxim life and through the entire Vickers period as well. And it actually fits onto the mounting of the Maxim. So not a Mark IV tripod, it doesn't fit on that at all, but it was part of the Mark III carriage mounting. So it would fix to those, and you have this strap in place to hold it on there. It's similar to some of the ammunition boxes of the period as well, that sideways strap. But what you could also have in those, so it wasn't just made for the two lubricating cans and the two half pint cans. It was actually used for these Cans Oil MG Mark 1 as well. And sometimes, we don't have an example, but sometimes you see them with those internal flaps cut out. And that's because actually it fits 4 of these widthways quite nicely without that strap in place. You can see there that it doesn't fit with the strap, so you'd need to, or without that piece of leather in there, so you'd have to cut that out. But that's how 4 cans, and the 1942 Vocabulary of Army Ordnance Stores talks about fitting 4 of these cans in one of these cases as well. So it's either 2 half pint oil cans and 2 lubricating oil cans, so 2 of those cans half pint and 2 cans oil lubricating, or 4 cans oil MG Mark 1. That's what goes in this, quite a common accessory. There'll be some on eBay right away, I'm sure, but always empty, never any indication of what goes in there. So hopefully that helps you fill it up with the right number of cans and the right equipment, and explains where the name comes from as well. So another question we've had is, how do you fill a Vickers ammunition belt without the luxury of a belt filling machine? We know we're very privileged to have these in the collection, and you know it's clearly an aid to us where we do fire from the Vickers, but we don't actually use these type of ammunition belts that often. Normally we're using the stripless ammunition belt that was seen in the Second World War, and these are more difficult to fill. You do really need a belt plug like this, and it's worth saying that so that's the shape of the round. It goes into that stop there, and you have to push it in. These are not designed to be refilled manually, so they weren't designed to be reused really. They were designed for factory packing in the liners, and then they'd be sent filled. So they weren't really supposed to be used with these, but clearly it works. We've used it. That's how it should look once it's in there, and then you should be able to put a round of ammunition in there completely. What we've done though is, these are quite hard to get hold of, and we fill these en masse. So if you can't, then try and turn one. This is one of the better turned ones that we have, and you can see there that we've just shaped the profile and given it a stop so that it will push through, and it works quite well after a few turns. So it will start to smooth up, and you can really sort of get in there. Well, you can start to, these belts will give you blisters on your forefinger of thumb if you do. But it goes from the rear to the front, so that bead sits along the front there, and then that goes into the rear. We can turn these up if people need them. People need a number of them. It's based on the dimensions of this, so it will work, and we've done it on a number of occasions. If you are reloading ammunition belts though, it might be worthwhile soaking them if they're brand new belts or haven't been reloaded. There's a piece in the manual that talks about soaking ammunition belts. Obviously it generally means these. If you are worried about getting them in the right place, then this type of belt clearly has the long strips that you line the tip of the bullet up. But this doesn't have that, and these don't work in a belt filling machine either. So what we've done is created a template. We've made it look a bit more authentic, because sometimes we've used these on living history displays or when we've been filling with blank in the field. And what we've done is got it so that those studs generally go to the bottom of that ammunition belt, so that the rounds are all flat, and you can just almost get them in most places, and then push it down if you need to make sure that you've got a nice even feed. That rib goes along the front of the feed block, so that if it's in the wrong place, it will cause a stoppage, a number 3 stoppage normally. It starts to get a twisted belt, but this type of belt is generally more forgiving than this, because if these are out of line, then it stops at the front of the feed block, and clearly there's less give in a piece of metal than there is in a piece of cloth. So you've got a choice about how you can fill that. I would recommend if just filling them for display, or you've got a really crisp new belt, just soak them in water for a while, put the rounds in while it's wet, and then let it dry. It should work. You might need to test the strength of the fusee spring, and make sure that it extracts properly from a small section of belt first. So yeah, if you will need to use an awl or something like that to make sure that the belts are big enough. It may be possible to use a drill round actually screwed onto the end of something that gives you that, but this is this or the actual belt plug proper is what you need to use. So there's a few options there. Hopefully, it won't result in you having blisters, but certainly, your thumb, as you push down on that bout onto that round, you don't want to be doing more than one bout a day if you can help it. Certainly, if you've not got soft fingers that spend most of their time on social media trying to promote the association. Now, a really quick answer. We've got a couple of longer answers, and there'll be another longer one in a minute. But we were asked following one of our gun study video on our 1053 what DP actually stands for, and it's for drill purposes. So it means that this particular barrel, in this case, wasn't to be used for ball ammunition in action. It wasn't to be fired from. You'd have DPB, drill purpose blank, if it was a blank firing barrel. But it actually just means that, drill purposes, you can use this for stripping down the weapon, reassembling it, and it get worn. Don't use service weapons for that, and it means that this has gone out of spec for some reason, or there were just too many service barrels. So quite often you'll see things that are perfectly serviceable used as DP examples, and you'll see whole guns marked with DP, white bands painted around them. Not just Vickers machine guns, but any weapon. So DP stands for drill purposes. And we also get asked really technical questions sometimes. So in this case, we were asked what this thread is here. Obviously, somebody's perhaps using a barrel blank and wants this thread, which is what the muzzle cup screws onto. And actually, what you do have is this example, this gauge exists on the militaria market, on the surplus market as well. And the thread gives us an example, it gives us the information there that it's 5/8 by 20, but 5/8 what? What form of thread? And we needed to consult the REME inspection gauge standard to tell you that that's the Whitworth thread. For those of you not familiar with British thread sizes or anything like that, then there are various thread types, thread cuts, and they're all different. But this one is 5/8 British Standard Whitworth, as are many parts on the Vickers machine gun. So if you need to rethread things, then it's worth looking up not only the size, but the type of thread that it refers to as well. And then we've got a gauge that checks it in this case and rolls away. But yeah, we get more technical queries as well as the basics. So feel free to fire any question you want at us, and we'll try to answer it. Certainly those inspection standards that helped us answer this are available for patrons to download. They're not on the general website at the moment. Now, here's perhaps a longer explanation. I wouldn't normally include such a long question in one of these Q&A sessions. I'd have stuck it on as a separate video, but the schedule's so full at the moment with all the videos we're providing, I wanted to get this in somehow so it's as part of the Q&As. And it is a commonly asked question, it's a frequently asked question. And it's, how does indirect fire work with the Vickers machine gun? And it was something I responded to by doing a long thread on Twitter. So please do go and find us on Twitter and you'll see the thread. We've also put it on the blog on the website though, so there's somewhere static for it. Things can get lost on Twitter. So it's a real primer about indirect fire with the Vickers machine gun. It doesn't go into all of the detail, it does go into some detail, and it looks at how indirect fire worked in the Second World War. The principles are the same from the start of the Vickers being used in this indirect role, all the way through to the end of its service. Some of the accessories change, and at the very start of the Vickers surface, you can just use the elevating wheel on the tripod to help some of the calculations, alongside a clinometer to give you specific angles and measured angles. So you do the adjustment on the elevating wheel and then the angle, you measure the angle on the clinometer. You use that alongside the range tables. That then changes slightly to being used with the bar foresight. So that fits on and allows you to do left and right of axis, so offset, using this sliding foresight there. So that can be used for indirect fire as well. And eventually it develops into the dial sight and the use of the aiming post and lamp that we've got here. And that's really this later stuff that we'll concentrate on, but the theory is the same. So what do I mean by indirect fire? And generally that's targets that cannot be seen from the gun position. And that might be a target that's been obscured by smoke, fog, lack of daylight, so at night time, or from a physical barrier such as a hill. Firing over the crest of a hill is certainly something that gets mentioned in many machine gunner accounts. Firing onto the reverse slope is something we'll talk about in a bit more detail. But So indirect fire is targets you cannot see, as opposed to direct fire, which are targets that can be seen from the gun position and directly laid on by the number one. So indirect fire is different to that. So what we have is the gun cannot see the target. So we have the gun position here, G. It has to be laid onto an aiming mark. For some, we'll have target over here, and we're going to put a big hill in the way. That target might be different, but we cannot see it. And we're going to lay onto an aiming mark. We still need to aim at something. So we're going to put a post. In this case, we're going to put an aiming post. One of these, the Mark III aiming post, white mark that we can see through the tangent sight. And because it's night or difficult, we're going to actually put the lamp on that. And the lamp, again, it's not something that goes bright, but there is a light that sits inside that, and that can be controlled from the box of the aiming lamp by a pull switch on the side there that turns the lamp on and off. And there's actually a piece of wire there that means you place all this out in front of the gun by about 30 yards, and it gives you your new zero line. So you lay on this lay on this aiming mark. In this case, it's the aiming post. It could also be a zero post, which is just a long tall piece of metal with the loop on the top, and we'll talk about how that works in a moment. Before we get to that though, it's worth explaining sort of the fundamentals of ammunition and small arms ammunition. So we've got the gun position here, nice Vickers, let's stick it on a tripod, and we've got the target there. Or the extreme range, it might vary. So what we've got is although there's quite a flat trajectory with Mark 8Z ammunition, we've still got this trajectory here that has a culminating point. That's the top of the trajectory, it might be before there, but that's the top point where gravity starts to take over. So all of the energy of the propellant has expended, and then gravity starts to take over, and the round falls to hit the target. That mechanism allows for actually an area of safe space under there, and you can fire overhead over the tops of your own troops, and you can do that direct or indirect, but in this case we're going to talk about indirect. So it gives you this culminating point, so up and then down, but the culminating point up there. It also means that you can fire across the top of crests or anything like that as well. So all this is quite accurately known and available in the range tables. So fundamentally there is an arc that the ammunition goes through. And it's this part that we have sort of two parts to the trajectory of the bullet that increases its range as well. So if we were firing in a straight line, it would start to drop a lot sooner, and that culminating point would see it drop to, gravity would take over. By firing up and forward, it gives us that chance for gravity to take over further rate and increase the range. So that's why the range of the Mark 8Z ammunition goes out to 4,500 yards, as opposed to the Mark 7, which only goes out to 2,700 yards. It's a boat tail effect that stops the tumble, allows this propellant sort of better aerodynamics of the round to get further, so the culminating point is further away, so it can then fall. But while it's going through this process, it actually creates a cone of fire. The trajectory of the gun, the vibration of the mounting, and just the movement that could be just millimeters or thousandths of an inch at the gun position actually creates a much bigger effect further on, and that creates a cone of fire. So you have a lower cone, an upper cone, and that enables that when it starts to drop, it drops over an area that creates, in this case, that's a beaten zone. And that beaten zone varies at distance, and this was all firstly done quite mechanically, in that they find a long beach, fire machine guns at different ranges and see what that beaten zone is. And so for a beaten zone to be calculated, 95% of the shot would fall within that zone. There would be outliers, but 95% of the shot would fall within it, and that's what created that beaten zone. So the dimensions of the beaten zone do change. So at 800 yards, range. The zone was 1,777 yards long, 2.7 yards wide, not very wide. It then gets shorter but wider. So 1,400 yards, 111 yards long, and at 6 yards wide. 2,000 yards, it became 30 yards long and 9.3 yards wide. And at 2,800, it became 100 yards long and 13.9 yards wide. So it goes from long and narrow to much shorter and wider as we increase the range. And as I said, the maximum range for the Vickers MG with Mark 8Z ammunition was 4,500 yards. But what you've got is anything closer than 800 yards was considered close. Effective range was then 800 to 2,000 yards, and long range was 2,000 to 4,500 yards. As you can imagine though, one gun firing at a target at the normal rate, one bout, 250 rounds every minute, or every 2 minutes even, and then every 5 minutes at the slow rate, depending on, it's not going to create a very big beaten zone effect. 1, 2, 3, it's going to be spread all around that zone for 95%, and we'll still have sort of 5%, 5 in every 100 rounds heading outside of that. So what we need to do is increase the density, and that's why one of the principles of indirect fire is that the minimum fire unit, fire group for that should be 4 guns. So what we can do, and we'll talk about how in a moment, but you then start to get gun number 1, you then get gun number 2 with its 95% in here and a few outside, number 3, and then number 4. So this would start to get really quite intense fire in there, a few outliers. 4 guns, 95%, 5, so we're going to have 20 rounds landing outside every minute. Or every 100 rounds, sorry. So that's 50 rounds landing outside every minute, but the majority of that is falling within the beaten zone. We've got 4 guns all converging on the same point to deny that to the enemy. Clearly though, indirect fire sees much larger numbers of guns being used, and it's quite typical at the end of the Second World War for a whole battalion to be shooting onto one location. So that's 36 guns, maybe throw a few 4.2-inch mortars in there as well. But we've got 36 guns all overlapping to create that dense cone of fire, beaten zone. And then we've got the likes of Al Alamein, where there's the possibility of up to 120 guns being fired on the same location, because so I think that's, I can't remember, so 9 Australian Div take 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, put them all together, and then they've got all of the machine gun platoons from all the different infantry battalions, get all those Vickers machine guns in there as well, put all the indirect fire calculations on them, and get them firing all on the same location. So absolutely huge numbers of Vickers machine guns being used in the same effect, and that's how it was in the First World War with multiple machine gun units as well. 64 guns per battalion in the First World War, plus perhaps a motor machine gun battery. I know the Canadians leverage 96 guns on one sort of fire control chart at Vimy Ridge in 1917. So you can absolutely deny huge amounts of space to the enemy by using this beaten zone effect, using indirect fire, using fire control calculations to do so. So we're going to use at least 4, because 1, even 2, isn't going to have the effect that we want with that beaten zone. So how are we going to set up all these guns to be firing on the same location? Well, just to, we've got some of the fire control equipment, such as the slide rule to do our calculations, and then we're going to have to use the dial sight in this case. Well, not always, but it's simplest if we use the dial sight. And what we do is we set up our pivot gun. Now the pivot gun, this in this case on the right of the line, 1 gun there, 2, 3, 4. We're only going to think about this, but clearly you can start to think 5, 6, 7, 8 as you need to. This is our pivot gun here. And our pivot gun, we're going to set out with our 0 posts. We're going to have 2 posts in front of it, so it knows it's like its 0 line from the pivot gun. And we're going to have the target, anywhere. You can switch targets. We won't draw a target on, but all we know is it's obscured. So maybe that hill's still there. The targets are obscured. We've got 1 pivot gun, and then other guns in the section or in the platoon, numbers 2, 3, and 4 are going to base all of their measurements on that 1 pivot gun that has been set up and knows its position accurately. To do that position, doesn't necessarily need to know its position accurately, sorry, but what it needs to know is its position in relation to the other guns, and because what we're going to do is set up parallel lines. We're going to parallel the guns so that these are all on the same frontage. So that if we do an angle of switch on the pivot gun, put that in there, and we're going to target over there. That same angle of switch, that angle of switch is going to be the same there, angle of switch the same there, and angle of switch the same there. So those angles can always be the same if we've got those guns set up and pointing in the right direction. So what we need to do is get the dial sights lined up between numbers 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 guns. So what we do is as that's sat on the gun, we push this button at the front and we will turn. It's not easy to do without a gun there. Put them at 90 degrees and this is now looking at 90 degrees. This will look to number 2 gun's dial sight. And on the front of it, it says 90 degrees left. So we're going to read, so number 1 gun is going to read from here. And then on number 2 gun, they will turn their dial sights to 90 degrees left, but from the rear. So they will start to read on this back angle. And you can see that it's directly opposite. So then they need to line up this lensatic sight with the lensatic sight on the number 1 gun. And they might need to move their tripod, they might need to move their gun to enable that to happen, but they're going to get it as accurately as possible because that has, again, a degree or two here has a massive effect at the target position. And this is why the accuracy of it is. So numbers 2, 3, and 4 will read off the back and they will get 90 degree left off the back there. Whereas number 1, as we go back, just switch that back, we'll have 90 degrees left on the front. So that will be on that side. And that's how, once those are all lined up, everything works in the same way. Their angle of switch is at 0. And that's why you sometimes, so number 1 gun will turn his dial sight back to 0 and they'll realign on their aiming post. Number 2 and number 3 guns don't need to, the other guns don't need to turn their dial sights back, but number 1 gun needs to turn back on the 0 line so that they can then do the angles of switch based on that gun. And then the number 2, 3, and 4 may well, they don't need to realign to 0. What they can do though, to make life easier, is if they imagine, they're at 90 degrees left. So what they will do, what they will do is they'll take that and then they'll leave. So this is where this bit comes in. That bit flips up. That allows you to push the top there, quite stiff on this one. They're going to once they've got their guns in position, they're going to put their graduating wheel in the middle there back to 0. They're then, I've turned it the wrong way, look. They're then going to turn that top to line up with the dial sight of the number 1. So, and they've got an adjusting wheel here. So on their gun, it's going to say 0 at the back, and then, but this is actually looking at number 1 gun, not looking at the target line at all. So that if there's any angles or switches to be added, they can add them here, and they then just need to realign the gun every time. So if we add 10 degrees left, if 10 degrees left is that on here, they just have to realign this with number 1 gun, the pivot gun, and they will their angles of switch will be correct. Hopefully that's clear. I jumbled through a couple of bits, but it's relatively simple and a lot easier to explain on the ground, which we will get to at some point soon. So there's a couple of other options as well though. You can, so I've put the angles of switch on there, so that's what makes that work, all of the number 1 gun. Let's just take those off. Sometimes your target might be narrower or wider than the gun frontage here. If we've got a 15-yard frontage, 15 yards between each gun, we've only got a 45-yard frontage. Sometimes your target might be wider than 45 yards. It might be, say 75, and we've got a spread. So what we do is a system of taps. You have to work out the spread that's needed, which is effectively the difference between the two, how much the taps allow for at that range, and you can look at you have to convert the angle that's needed, the spread there, into a number of yards and into minutes, and then we've got this tap that we've talked about perhaps before onto the side of the gun that allows you to spread the fire. So it's quite sort of a complex system, but these guys were doing it all the time. Certainly in Northwest Europe, 1944 to 45, they weren't in their normal sort of, as we'd envisage a Vickers to be used perhaps in our heads, they weren't seeing the enemy and firing directly at them. They were doing this, indirect fire from behind cover, from behind slopes and all that sort of thing. I mentioned about reverse slopes. What we're able to do, ignore this stuff for a minute, but what they're able to do, because of this beaten zone perspective, beaten zone example, I will just rub that off. You've got a gun firing here, and if you've got a hill like that, clearly if the ammunition is falling in a beaten zone, this spreads out, so you're actually able to cover quite a lot of area onto that reverse slope. It's the same with artillery. This is just artillery stuff being reused really in machine gunnery terms, and converting it into sort of smaller scale. So reverse slopes, beaten zones on those work really well. If you're firing a beaten zone on a forward slope, it actually shortens what you're getting, because that cone of fire is then shorter. Might be at the same range almost, but it's going to be a bit shorter. All of that is in the range tables, and it can all be calculated using the slide rules, using the information that's on these slide rules as well. So, there's loads of stuff in the manuals. I hope that's just been a rattle through of a primer of indirect fire with the Vickers machine guns. Paralleling, because it's a term that comes up quite often. How did these guns all get onto the same angle of switch? How were they used? There were fire control charts as well that they used to make sure that targets were worked out. If you wanted to, I talked about firing onto the same point. You knew that if you knew that 15-yard frontage wasn't the width of the target, that 45-yard frontage here, you were able to then, you'd know the distance, you'd know the angles here, you'd sort of know the angles at the target. You'd perhaps apply number 4 gun would have a greater angle than number 3 gun, than number 2 gun, because number 1 gun would be firing at the target, but numbers 2, 3, and 4 would all converge to overlay their beaten zone on that target as well. It just is a matter of knowing distance and then the angles of switch that can all be calculated. So I hope that's been of interest. We will get to more detail on it. Please do ask your questions. They're making us think about the subjects that we need to be covering on the channel, and in the association's research. They make us dive into that as well. So as always, thank you for watching. Please do support us on Patreon, buy me a coffee or PayPal, to make sure that the association can keep spending the time sharing this in knowledge and information. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. Please support us on Patreon if you're able to, and let us know of anything you'd like to see in the future. I look forward to hearing from you.